So I'm currently working on a tech wave for On Live from back in the day because I think it's a bit more interesting than you'd think with how game streaming is now, looking back on what happened to that platform. But it's taking a bit longer than I thought it would. I keep adding more and more stuff to it, so I'm going to keep working on it. But there was something else I wanted to go over today because I was watching the clock for this thing. That is the Nintendo PlayStation. Do you remember how that was being auctioned off, right? And we were talking about how much could it go for? What could it get to? Because allegedly the owners of it who were auctioning it off had turned down an offer of $1.2 million. That was the word going around. There were several sources reporting that, and it sounded like this thing had the potential to get more than that. I mean, think about it. It got over $400,000 in like the first 24 hours, and it still had a while to go. So we figured, all right, it still has days and days to go. It'll get up there. It'll get over $1.2 million. Well, it kind of went the other way. Remember, we had also later on talked about how bids appeared to be getting pulled, like people are canceling their bids for it, or they were false bids or fake, or the person, I guess, didn't have the funds to pay for it, so they had to prove that they did and they couldn't. Either way, bids started to disappear, and the amount started to go back down. In fact, this thing ended up selling for $360,000, with $60,000 of that being a buyer's premium that essentially goes to the house or heritage auction. So that means people who are selling it got $300,000, then there's tax on top of that. I don't think it went how they were planning this whole thing to go over, and there was a question as to why that happened, which we'll talk a little bit about, but this was the page for it here. And it doesn't, unless you sign in, it doesn't really tell you, but you can still scroll through and see the listing and all of this. But $360,000 total is what was paid for this thing. And we now know who paid for it, which is interesting on its own because there was the concern that whoever bought it would just enter it into a private collection, close the doors, and we would never see this thing again. It actually looks like it's going the opposite direction, as in we might be seeing this thing quite a bit depending on what they do with it, because there is now word that the person who picked this up wants to maybe do a video game museum, and I have some questions about how they would put that together as well. But if we talk for 1 second about kind of the precedent that this sets for video game hardware, or just games in general, this easily shatters what was previously, I believe, $80,000 to $90,000 for a original Super Mario game that had some rarity to it overall. This is much higher than that, right? 3 times the amount easily. And this sets the new bar for a video game auction that was public. Like, I'm sure there could have been some hidden backroom deals on some very rare stuff, although this I think is like the rarest thing we've ever seen for video games. This does show that yes, games are quite expensive if they are that rare. There is value here. It didn't crack $1 million like a lot of people thought that it might have, and that would have been nuts, but it did push enough money to where a lot of bigger places are looking into this, like the mainstream media. All the mainstream media sites reported on this. Forbes is the one who got the exclusive for the identity of the buyer, so there's a lot of interest even just outside of gaming for this. That's good for gaming there, but it definitely did not go the way that it was intended to by the sellers. They did a lot of touring for this. They turned down many offers. In fact, the person who did win it offered them money to not even have to go on tour and do all of this. It was less, but still, to turn down what was reported as that $1.2 million offer, that probably hurts a bit right now. So this is the article from Forbes. I'll link it down below if you want to read a little more about this. But they do reveal that the person who bought this thing was Greg McLemore, who did buy pets.com back in the day. There was like the big .com boom and all of this, and you could buy up .coms and then end up selling them to bigger companies. And apparently he sold it to Amazon, had a bunch of money from that, and has since, according to them, 20 years or so, been buying a lot of old, rare, expensive video game memorabilia, systems. Arcade machines seems to be the big thing. So there have been several pieces, I didn't even realize this, on Greg, all about some of the stuff that he's been collecting. Here's a listing, for example, right here that kind of talks about some of the arcade machines. This was a report, and you can see it says Greg McLemore owns 750 games from 1880s coin-operated amusements to video games such as 1971's Computer Space, the first coin-operated video game. So Yeah, a lot of strange things, weird things you wouldn't see normally. I don't know if they're one of a kind like this Nintendo PlayStation is, but there's certainly things that you would kind of stop and maybe want to take a good look at. And that's why apparently Greg McLemore is looking into doing a video game museum, because he's accumulated the inventory, I guess, to take a shot at it. But there is some good news, like I said, for people who are worried about this thing getting shut away somewhere and never seen again, right? Preserved for good in someone's, I don't know, a big collector's room. They have all these cool things. McLemore says himself to Forbes, who got the exclusive on this, "I'm looking to not have this machine just buried in a closet somewhere." He wants to actually take it on the road and even let museums that are already established borrow it for different video game events. For example, he's going to be lending it to the University of Southern California Pacific Asia Museum in spring and summer 2021 to show, according to them, illustrating the Asian influence on the video game industry. And you will be able to go see the Nintendo PlayStation in person. I think that is a great idea, to more partner with museums that are already established and, they exist, rather than try to build one from the ground up for just all video games. Now, if you've been around this channel for a while, we've done a few things where we would go out and see events that take place. We saw a video game experience is what they did, but it was really, really neat. And there's the video on the channel you can check out. But we went up, is in Philadelphia. And instead of just being a thing where you go around and you see all of the rare pieces like you would at an art museum, you go through kind of the years starting from the beginning. They had, obviously they have like Pong and Asteroids, and they even had the original Donkey Kong arcade machine that Miyamoto, worked through and then went on to do Mario and all of this there for you to play. But you went through rooms and they gradually got closer and closer to our time now. So you went through the entire history of video games as an interactive experience. That, I believe, is a much better learning experience overall. It was a really cool experience. I liked it a lot. It was a temporary experience because they had partnered with an institute there in Philadelphia, so it did go away eventually, but that is what I would picture a good video game museum to be. And people have told me that those are existing right now all over the US and parts of the world. That is the direction I would go, rather than try to build one from the ground up just to store really expensive games in. It says McLemore told Forbes, saying he wants to take his collection, which he estimates over 800 coin-operated machines and countless other smaller games, trade magazines, original art, and build out a permanent museum. Now, I have to imagine museums are pretty expensive to create, and like I said, I don't really know how fun it would be to go there and just look at the stuff. I like the idea of having interactive stations and just overall being able to play the games as you go through the years, like the place that was around here. And I do wonder if it is interesting or strong enough for tourists to want to go to as a destination, or even the locals to visit semi-frequently like you would for other museums. That is, I believe, a pretty big question mark for that. But McLemore has an advantage, the Nintendo PlayStation. That is a one-of-a-kind item, right? At least for now. I say for now because I do wonder if we'll see another one found at some point in time. This was just in an attic somewhere that they had bought from an auction years before. You never know. There could be another one that kind of escaped or leaked out there when they were supposedly destroying all of them. It's always possible. And if you find one, well, it's worth at least $300,000, $360,000 with the kind of the buyer's premium. So I think it's possible. But for now, McLemore has the only one in existence. And if you put that as the main attraction, quote unquote, in your museum, I guess you would at least have some pull from people who are interested in video games and want to see it. I don't know if a video game museum would ever be like a destination straight up, unless it had some really cool stuff in there that was interactive and one-of-a-kind items like the Nintendo PlayStation. I don't know if a bunch of older coin-operated machines would have that kind of a pull, because you have Nintendo and you have PlayStation here in just the title, but it could be a good starting point, I guess. McLemore seems to have the funds to do it, $360,000 to just put towards a Nintendo PlayStation. In some parts of the world, that's a relatively nice house that you could have with $360,000, like straight up. They bought a Nintendo PlayStation that doesn't really have many games for it, for like the disc drive anyway. It plays Super Famicom games. But after it touring and all of this, I did think it was going to get a bit more. I'm not really sure what happened exactly, unless people saw it and they said, that's cool, and they kind of just moved on. I guess just people who want the thing had a plan for it, like McLemore kind of does, or they saw the price getting up to the point where they thought, well, $360,000 could get me several more pieces in my collection rather than just this one, especially for people trying to build up this crazy rare collection. Would go a long way towards completing several different sets rather than one system that's not really going to play a lot of stuff. But let me know what you guys think about the Nintendo PlayStation selling for $360,000, significantly less than I think a lot of us thought it would be going for, and significantly less than the $1.2 million that was alleged to have been offered by another buyer. Now, I did tell you that McLemore did offer an amount ahead of time years ago before they started touring. That was $100,000. So at least the sellers of the Nintendo PlayStation at auction got 3 times more than was originally offered by McLemore, and had to pay 3 times more than he was even anticipating. But I guess $300,000 to the seller for what they found in the attic, I think is still pretty good. Like, I mean, most people are going to take that. Most people also would have taken that $1.2 million straight up, but still, not a bad chunk of change for a game system that doesn't play a lot that you found in your attic. Thanks, guys, for watching. Make sure you like the video on the way out if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not, and I'll see you next time.